Tanya Plibersek is Deputy Labor Leader. Tanya Plibersek, welcome back to Breakfast.
Thanks, Fran.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you and your listeners.
I'll come to that culture war in a moment, but first the honours system. The honours system, the Australia Day Honours, recognises merit and achievement in community and in specialist fields. Why should gender targets have a place in that?
Well, it's not just important to make sure that our Australian honours represent the contribution of men and women more equally, but we know that First Nations Australians, people with a disability, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and even there's even a kind of postcode disparity in our Australian honours. So without taking anything away from the people who've been acknowledged or will be acknowledged on this Australia Day, what we're saying is we need to make sure that our Australian honours system really captures those unsung heroes that are being missed by our current award system.
So why are they being missed? Because the public nominates, don't they?
That's right. But since 1975, on average, about 30% of awards have gone to women, for example. And if we believe that Australian women are making as an important contribution to our public life, our volunteering and so on as men, then there's obviously something wrong with the nomination system. And I think we need to look at things like the categories that are being nominated in. If you have a look, there are standalone categories, for example, for mining, engineering, for primary industries and so on. But the areas where women traditionally work or volunteer are often subsumed in other categories. Like nursing, for example, has no standalone category. It falls under the general category of medicine. So we need to look at the categories that people are nominated in, and we need to look at the nomination process to encourage more women to be nominated. There are fantastic community organisations like Honour a Woman. We can support the work that they're doing to encourage more members of the public to look around them at the women that are volunteering and contributing to our community and nominate them.
You need to be careful, don't you, because it is a public nomination system, that's what you're talking about, and the public is only nominating 30% of women to the honours to be considered for an honours. So you don't want to skew the public intention in the end list.
No, but what we want to say to people is have a look around you at the women that are working so diligently for the betterment of our community that aren't being acknowledged, and think about acknowledging them.
So will the target you're going for, I think 40% by 2020, will that be a direction to those who select the honours committee?
No, it's an invitation for our community to work harder in identifying women who are not currently being acknowledged for their good work, and not just women, but those underrepresented categories more broadly.
And if Labor was in government, would you be making sure that those categories change?
Yes, I think we need to re-examine the categories, because the areas that have standalone categories are often the fields that are dominated by men, and a lot of the fields where women dominate are actually subsumed in larger categories.
So if in government, would this be a direction? This would happen, this change?
Well, looking at the categories is certainly something we'd do, and we'd also make sure that the Council of the Order of Australia is gender balanced. It is currently at around about 50%, which is great. We need to make sure that remains, and we need to work with community organisations, with the states and territories and others to make sure that women and other underrepresented groups are being nominated at a greater rate.
It is already happening to some degree, as we understand it. This year's list, the number of women receiving honours will be over 35%, as I understand it. So it's already getting towards your 40% target. Do we really need this? I mean, one of our listeners has written in and saying, surely this is just nothing more than a populist distraction from the real and genuine issues interesting voters.
No, I think it's important to acknowledge that we are making improvements. That's good. It's a great step forward, but I don't think we should rest on our laurels.
What about Australia Day more broadly? Over the weekend, we're going to celebrate the National Day. Some of us will celebrate, some of us will mourn. But a new debate is underway around this over national identity. Bill Shorten has accused the Prime Minister of harbouring, quote, a bizarre Captain Cook fetish. What's wrong with commemorating a moment in the birth of modern Australia? What's wrong with doing that?
Nothing. I think it's important to acknowledge our history, both the good and the bad. As you say, Australia Day is a day that Australians broadly will be celebrating, but for Aboriginal Australians, it's a day of mourning as well. We need to, as a mature country, be able to deal with both of those aspects of our history and acknowledge both of them in a clear-eyed way. I'm proud of modern multicultural Australia. I think this is the best country on earth.
Are you happy to celebrate Australia Day on January 26th?
I'll be at citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day, as I always am, saying how proud I am to be Australian and to be part of this fantastic country. But I'll also go to the Yabun Festival in my electorate and acknowledge that for Aboriginal Australians this is a very difficult day. Like we actually can do both. We are sophisticated enough and adult enough as a nation to accept that modern Australia is great. I wouldn't want to live in any other country in the world. I love it. But we have parts of our history that are painful.
We're going to be speaking with Barnaby Joyce a little later in the program, because he and some other Liberals, including Senator Dean Smith, considering a private members' bill to enshrine January 26th as Australia Day in law, to legislate it, because they fear that a Labor government will be influenced by others and would go and eventually change the date. Yeah. Do you see an issue with legislating Australia Day? Would you support that?
Look, we've made it clear that we don't have a plan to change Australia Day, but honestly, we've got hardly any sitting days between now and the next election. Parliament is literally barely sitting. If this government were really serious about doing something that would affect people's lives, they could legislate to reverse the cuts to health and education. They could legislate to restore penalty rates. They could legislate our plan for 10 days paid domestic violence leave. They could legislate our bigger, better tax cuts that give almost double the tax cuts to low and middle income earners. If they actually wanted to do something,
private members' bill is unlikely to get on the papers in the next 2 weeks. But in general, do you have an issue with the notion of legislating January 26th?
Well, we'd look at any legislation that was put forward, but I honestly, you said your listener before was talking about populist distractions. I think everybody sees this for what it is. It's an effort to stoke political correctness debate on the eve of Australia Day. It's just tacky.
And are we, do you think, heading for another culture war? I mean, as I quoted Bill Shorten there, saying that the Prime Minister had a bizarre Captain Cook fetish because there's a plan to fund Endeavour replica circumnavigating the country, which he says will be a reconciliation mission as much as anything else. The Prime Minister says Labor's sneering at Australia's history and is fuelling political correctness, which is seeing kids being raised to despise our history.
It's just laughable, isn't it, to have a Prime Minister that is so desperate and that he's accusing the opposition leader of being un-Australian on the eve of Australia Day. I mean, truly, this is that sort of commentary smacks of the desperation that we see from the Liberal Party at the moment.
Are we seeing the start of a new culture war?
Not from us. I mean, I'm sure that the Liberals would love to distract people from the fact that the cost of everything is going up, but their wages are flatlining. I'm sure they'd love to be talking about anything other than that, but we won't get sucked into that.
We're barrelling along to a federal election. A former colleague of yours, former National ALP President Warren Mundine, has gone to the other side. He's accusing you of destroying the opportunities for working class people. That's from a former national president of the Labor Party. How much does that hurt?
Not at all. I mean, Warren Mundine has been very clear for the last 20 or 30 years that he wants a seat in Parliament with any party that'll have him. And, for a long time, he was desperate for the Labor Party to give him a seat in Parliament. There's a reason we didn't, and I'm sure the voters of Gilmore will discover that.
By and large, though, is it better that we have more Indigenous Australians sitting in our Parliament than less?
Yeah, and that's why I'm so proud that we've got Pat Dodson and Linda Burney and Malandiri McCarthy and, right around the states and territories, a terrific representation of Indigenous Australians in the Labor Party. It is very important, just as I've always supported increasing the representation of women and people from ethnically diverse backgrounds and people of different ages and family backgrounds and professional experiences. Of course it's important. But let's face it, Warren Mundine was, talking to the Labor Party for a long time about a seat in Parliament. We didn't think he was suitable for it. He then talked to the Liberal Democrats and now the Liberal Party's accepted him. I think the bigger question is, if Scott Morrison is now saying that he had to intervene in the pre-selection for Gilmore because Ann Sidmalis was bullied out of her seat, why didn't he stand up when Ann Sidmalis said she was being bullied out of her seat and intervened to save her in the way he intervened to save Craig Kelly? So Scott Morrison's not prepared to intervene to save Ann Sidmalis or Jane Prentice, but he is prepared to intervene to save Craig Kelly and and parachute in celebrity candidate into the seat of Gilmore, Warren Mundine. Why? What's the logic of all of this?
Nevertheless, if you look at it, Labor's lost a former leader, Mark Latham, to One Nation. You lost your former national president to the Liberal Party. To paraphrase Oscar Wilde, to lose one might be misfortune, to lose two is carelessness. What does it tell us about modern Labor Party? These people are voting with their feet.
I really think if you look at Mark Latham in recent years, I think we're all pretty relieved he's not in the Labor Party anymore. And I'd have to say the same about Warren. I mean, there was a reason no one supported him to go into Parliament, despite the fact he was knocking on a lot of doors for many decades.
What was that reason?
I'll let the voters of Gilmore work that out for themselves.
Tanya Plibersek, thank you very much.
Thank you, Fran.
Tanya Plibersek is the Shadow Education Minister and Deputy Leader of the Labor Party in this election year.